Thank you, David. I became a grandfather in February last year, and when I try to think about, banks, and when I try to think about anything, I do try to concern myself with what life will be like for him when he grows up, because it's a way of my trying to frame what the future of something is, what are the trends I have to worry about, what it would look like. And like anybody else, I listen to experts. I love the views of Roy Amara and how he framed our capacity as human beings to overestimate short-run impacts of technology trends and to seriously underestimate the long-term impacts. And therefore, when I look at technology, I worry about it, I think about it. I also cannot help but refer to Douglas Adams and the salmon of doubt construction of all of us feel very comfortable with the technology we're born into, and we consider progressive, exciting, really important, the things that we see between 18 and 35. And then it's outside our sort of comfort zone. It's unnatural, we hate it. And we all have these sort of perceptions of what makes it. So when I look at my grandson, I say, what will life to do with banking be like for him? When I speak to his mother, she thinks email is a back channel for changing passwords, right? Doesn't actually use it for any form of communication, but needs to have it when she gets locked out of an account or something and needs to be able to sort of somehow regress to it. For my grandson, will cash, physical cash, actually be just an analog backup because something else has broken down and he just needs that backup for a while? Or will it be retro? Like, I have maybe 3,000 albums at home. I love vinyl. I have printers and calculators that don't use electricity. I have typewriters aplenty. I look at things that have managed to last. And I have to think about what will last in the things that we're trying to create, which we call banking. And in doing that, I try to think of what a bank was when I was born. And it was not connected to anything else. It was local. It was a passbook. I didn't even have a checkbook in India. I didn't even have a card. The concept of cards hadn't even entered. But I had to go to a physical place with a passbook, get checked against it, much like building societies here probably before the 1980s. And then I tried to look at other things and how they change and how they're influencing what we see banking to be. I used to go to a petrol pump to buy petrol. And it suddenly became something that looked like a news agent, and then it became a supermarket, it became a food hall. And maybe soon there won't be any petrol for sale there. Maybe soon no driver will go there, but it will still be a restaurant, a caravanserai, a place where someone breaks a journey. So the whole notion of a petrol pump may change dramatically. But the idea of stopping in a journey will not. I look at a phone and, having a black Bakelite telephone that you didn't even own to make a call seemed to be all that it was about. And my children are 30, 24, 18. None of them has a landline. And the youngest does many things with her phone except make calls. Okay? I've never seen her really make calls. In fact, she doesn't pick her phone up, just goes straight to voicemail. But maybe that's true for all teenagers. But in fact, my favorite definition of a teenager still remains someone who can text without taking her hand out of her pocket. But the changes that take place, whether I look at the petrol pump or the phone, can actually relate to banking as well. Because you have to think about what banking is before you talk about the new bank or what a new bank would set out to do. And I studied economics, I studied banking at late school and at university, and I remember being quite surprised that even the word bank, and for that matter the word bankrupt, actually came from the bench that people sat on to talk to each other, the banco, and it was a notion of trust between the merchants in Lombardy who spoke to each other, and if you didn't keep your word, the other merchants came along and broke your bench in two and you had nowhere to sit. That your banco was rutto. Right? The word credit comes from credere, belief. Right? Banking was about and is and will be about trust. And trust underpins human relationships, human interactions. Whether it is in personal terms or in business terms, our ability to scale, our ability to do anything, trust is a key component. And the concept of banking is actually pricing risk in something someone has to take faith in. I'm going to move this from A to B. I'm going to pay this person. I'm going to transform the shape of this. I'm going to look after this for you. Right? Banks used to have safety deposit vaults. Banks used to provide references. A banker's reference was saying this guy is good for something. Okay? A lot of what banking did wasn't about money. It was about trust. And trust changes when you talk about a connected digital world. You have to understand how trust scales. You have to understand what trust means in this context. I mean, just before we came on, I was talking to a couple of the guys, and we were talking about how ID and any form of identity, any form of proving who you are has become such a critical part. But it's not has become, it has always been. Okay? When I studied the London money market and looked at how the discount houses and acceptance houses formed, the idea that merchant banks would go out, form outposts in the middle of nowhere in order to create a mechanism where people in the London money market as discount houses could discount a bill because they knew the signature of the person who was accepting the bill 5,000 miles away, who would then speak for someone. Okay? The idea of a friend, being able to have sort of effectively domains of trust that get nested, that get daisy-chained, has been part and parcel of what banking is about. Lots change, lots of things change because we are connected human beings. I mean, I've tried to think about, where people go to do things and saying, today people appear to go to the gym more than most other things. And their entertainment, their access to entertainment is in a gym. So is that where they will do their banking? Or will the gym come home and they'll do their banking in the home? And every one of these changes creates new ways of working, new occupations. I couldn't help but smile at recent cartoons to do with Fitbit, where one had this guy completely looking catatonic on a bed. And one of his mates comes into the room and says, what the hell are you doing there? Are you ill or something else? He said, shh, I cannot move. My Fitbit hasn't charged yet. And separately, there have been references to people who, one of the new professions to be is a Fitbit walker. Okay? You pay someone to get the steps onto your sort of device. So, if you outsource the right to have a level at games, you outsource the right to claim how many steps you took yesterday. So with those sort of changes, when you live in a hyper-connected world, there are many, many things that are happening that are going to really alter how we see relationships, how we see trust, how we see the scaling of those relationships and trust, how we see proof that something has happened, that something has taken place. And when you even think about trust, shortly I have to get on a plane. And when I choose an airline, trust is a key component of it. There is something to do with the brand. There is something to do with repeatability. There is something to do with guarantees and what happens in recourse or in breach. What are the underlying regulations? And all of these form part of trust. You're not going to get onto an airline you've never heard of where you have no idea how they train, how they maintain, how they look after. In 1980, when I came to this country, the cheapest airline I could fly back to India on, and we all pined for home, was Ariana Afghan Airways. But somehow, even though it was less than half the price of Aeroflot, and Aeroflot was less than half the price of Air India, and Air India was less than half the price of British Airways, I had to think before I got on a plane. Price was not the only thing. Value became important, convenience became important. Trust, relationships, simplicity, convenience, these are the things that actually drive what we consider banking. So people want to be able to make these transformations where they are, when they are, how they are, to the device or channel that is to be used, with the necessary alerts. A good friend of mine, Brett King, he's spoken long enough and often enough for how the transformation of banking has taken place, and I'm not going to try to either emulate him or replace him, but part and parcel of what he always says is, please understand this future is something that is taking place with connected devices, with empowered people, and with data. So that's where I come in a way, Banking has always been about trust, but trust gets underpinned with data. How do I prove that what I said I will do, I did? How do I know that you are you and the person you're dealing with is the person that you expected to deal with? How do I know that the transformations that you have asked for in terms of moving things from A to B or from format A or shape A or nature A to B, in each one of these, the idea of the data that underpins it, made transparent and served self to the customer, is the critical part. And before any of you sort of ask further, who owns the customer data, all I will say is there is a clue in the name. Okay? If you ever want to think about who owns customer data, there is a clue in the name. When we look at the data, our ability to serve customers what they want, where they want, how they want it, is completely reliant on getting the data. But we have to understand why I even say that. It's not there's this general exhaust that has got to be done. We never needed translate tables. We never needed a Rosetta Stone, as was referred to by David when he looked at the UGG sort of password, until two tribes that didn't speak the same language met. Because you didn't need to translate. We never needed to synchronize time until we connected two places by something that had to be consistent and repeatable, like a train. We never needed labels until you had more than one thing to describe. You had to move from, Malk, who lived opposite the pub in the village. When you had two Malks, you had to say Malk, who lived opposite the pub in the village and who's married to Mo, who looks after the cows, kind of thing, because it's those extended adjectives. And even these adjectives, these labels have rules. Right? I'm a retarded hippie. I still listen to music, not just made in the 60s and 70s, but by musicians who are now, if they are still alive, in their 60s, 70s, or even 80s. And it's always famous blue raincoat. It is not blue famous raincoat. Okay? There are implied conditions. Data begins to have value when you light it up with time and place. If it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. And time and place used to be expensive to associate with data. It's become cheap. A lot of what you see in the changes are how we can provide services. And it's not just banking, it's the Uberization of things, it's the eBaying of things, it's the Amazoning of things. Happens because we've been able to take data and say, metadata of time and place are cheap. Identity has become cheaper, but it's still somewhat expensive. When you have time, place, and identity, data begins to live. You can do something with it. The next thing that happens is the labels, and getting referential integrity proper is that critical if you want to really make data live. And you don't make data live because you're a data geek or a nerd. Yeah, I'm chief data officer, so I guess I would be interested in data and I would continue to be interested in data. You make data live because it is the only way you are able to deliver what the customer wants. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about banking, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. In this hyper-connected, always-on, ubiquitous mobile world, we've landed up where the real battle is simplicity and convenience. You have to be able to simplify what the customer has to do in order to self-serve, in order to select, in order to get filters, in order to be able to make preferences and profiling understood. The flip side of it always is, and it's not just everything I want, but nothing else. Not somebody else's, not something else's. Right? Contextually aware. It is one thing for you to be told, we've got anti-fraud services that make sure that we test where you are. But first time you go abroad and you can't buy anything because there is an anti-fraud service that says, oops, it's not where you are. I have a pacemaker, it has an alarm that is meant to wake me up at 8:30 in the morning when something goes wrong so that I don't get shocked. I have the time to respond calmly. But it doesn't have GPS, which means that I had an alarm at 2:30 in the morning when I was in Austin. Okay, when we build these services, we have to understand those things. People collect data, but they don't necessarily understand how that data works. So I get recommendations from people like Amazon where I have a household account, and the household account has people from 18 to 30, and they also buy gifts for somebody else. So some of the recommendations make me look like one of the most perverted people possible because I'm a hybrid of an 18-year-old daughter, a 24-year-old son, and a 30-year-old daughter who's now a mother. Okay? You know, why am I suddenly collecting nappies? Okay? So when we start talking about the bank to be, when I want to look at the bank that my son, my grandson now, is going to be working on, we have every element of this to worry about through data. What is the trust barrier that needs to be overcome? How is that trust meant to be sort of emphasized, supported through data? It's not something that just happened today and through connectivity. You can see Walmart having transformed retail by saying, I have the ability to aggregate data. I have the ability to do that through hubs. You can see Amazon come along and say, the hub is not the answer, it is the home, and I'm going to connect everybody through the home because I can deliver a product to a home. You see Facebook saying, who said it's the home? It's the individual and the network of relationships that individual represents. We thought that retail was dead, but yet we see Amazon opening stores. We see Apple being able to deal with high-value retail capacity. It doesn't boil down to anything other than trust, simplicity, and convenience. We're at the beginning of how we're reinventing banking in it. When you want to understand where banking is going, understand where trust is going. Thank you for your time.
I know you've got to run for an aeroplane. I just want a 15-second question,
Sure.
JP.
Sure.
It's a big day on the markets. Give us an idea of what level of planning, maybe panic, maybe preparation is happening inside a big bank like Deutsche Bank in case the referendum goes for leave.
Okay. Well, all I will say is that with like any other contingency, you do at least 3 levels of planning. You run scenarios and you have the data. You make sure that each scenario has clear and explicit actions and who's going to be able to deal with it. And then you keep tracking the data to see what is the most likely at a given time. It's still all about data.
Thank you, JP.
David, thanks.